The millionaire stepped out of his car, expecting silence. Instead, he froze. His janitor was kneeling on the wet stone path, steadying a young woman on crutches who had nearly fallen. Her smile, fragile yet defiant, lit the space brighter than the mansion behind them, and he couldn't look away. The afternoon sun shimmered against the polished surface of the black car as it rolled quietly through the tall, iron gates of the estate. The millionaire, a man so accustomed to controlling every element of his world, leaned back against the leather seat with the habitual air of someone who expected nothing to be out of place. His life had been built on schedules, on exact arrivals and departures, on the sense that even time itself bent to his command. Today, however, had unfolded differently. Meetings had ended earlier than anticipated, and without telling anyone, he had decided to come home. He expected to find the house as he always left it, silent, pristine, a kind of museum where every detail obeyed his standards. But as the car eased onto the driveway, his eyes narrowed. Something was off. There was movement in the distance where there should have been stillness. He leaned forward, adjusting his grip on the leather briefcase resting across his lap, and his heart gave an unsteady thud. On the gleaming path in front of the mansion were two figures. One he recognized immediately, the janitor he had hired for small maintenance jobs. Daniel was his name. A man in his early 30s, tall but worn down, his clothes faded, his posture showing the weight of labor carried too many years in a row. He was kneeling on the ground, his hands steady, his voice low. Beside him was someone the millionaire had never seen before, a young woman with delicate features and a face lined not with age but with quiet endurance. She gripped a pair of crutches, struggling to steady herself. Her movements were halting, every step deliberate, as though each one demanded more strength than her body naturally possessed. Despite this, her eyes held a brightness, a resilience that seemed out of place against her fragile frame. The millionaire froze, hand tightening around his briefcase handle until the leather creaked. He told himself it was curiosity, but beneath that was something sharper, an emotion he couldn't immediately identify. What was she doing here? Why was Daniel not alone? His mansion was not a place for intrusions of this sort. And yet, as he watched from the shaded interior of the car, he felt rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to look away. The young woman faltered, her crutch slipping on the smooth stones of the path. Daniel immediately reached out, steadying her, his voice audible even from the driveway's edge. "You're all right, Emily," he said gently. "Don't worry. I've got you, Emily." The name carried across the air like a thread binding father and daughter. The millionaire stiffened in his seat. Daughter? He had never asked much about the man he paid, just enough to know his tasks would be completed on time. Yet here, on his immaculate steps, stood a story he had not expected, a janitor whose tired eyes softened instantly when turned toward his struggling daughter. The millionaire's throat tightened unexpectedly. He adjusted his tie, forcing down the lump of unease. His world was built on precision, on transactions, on the idea that value could be calculated. But what he saw now, this unpolished, unguarded moment between father and child, felt raw, almost intrusive, like he was watching something sacred. His instinct told him to step out, to demand an explanation, to remind Daniel of the boundaries between employer and employee. And yet, he didn't move. He sat there, still as stone, the hum of the car engine the only sound beside his uneven heartbeat. The image etched itself in his mind. Daniel kneeling, jacket spread across the ground so Emily wouldn't scrape her hands. Emily biting back frustration, determination flashing in her eyes, the fragile but unbreakable bond that tethered them together. The millionaire felt the weight of his briefcase heavier than usual, as though all the contracts, figures, and business empires inside it meant less at this moment than the scene unfolding on his front steps. For the first time in years, he realized he was not the richest man standing there. Daniel had not always been the man with worn shoes and calloused palms. Years ago, he had been a husband who believed that love, hard work, and faith in tomorrow were enough to hold a family steady. His wife had been his partner in everything, gentle where he was rough-edged, quick with a laugh when the weight of bills and responsibilities threatened to smother him. Together, they had dreamed of raising their daughter in a home where warmth outweighed wealth. But tragedy had a way of rearranging lives without permission. When Emily was 10, illness took her mother swiftly, leaving Daniel with a hole in his chest and a child who needed more strength than he thought he had left. Emily had already been born with a condition that made walking painful, each step requiring the aid of crutches and determination far beyond her years. After the funeral, Daniel had stood in their kitchen staring at the empty chair across from him, realizing that everything, cooking, working, caring, encouraging, now rested on his shoulders alone. From that day forward, survival became his craft. He worked where he could, mopping floors at dawn, fixing leaky pipes in the afternoons, scrubbing offices after dark. There were weeks when his body ached so badly that even lifting Emily into bed at night felt like dragging himself through mud. Still, he did it. He would whisper, "Rest now, sweetheart. Tomorrow's another day," even when tomorrow promised nothing easier than today. Some nights, when the fridge offered little more than leftovers, he pretended he wasn't hungry, so Emily would finish the last piece of bread or the small bowl of rice. Other nights, he'd quietly tuck away his exhaustion, cracking a joke to make her smile as though fatigue were just a shadow that couldn't touch them if he kept the light of laughter burning. And Emily, bright, stubborn, brave Emily, never let him forget why he fought so hard. She would cling to his hand on doctor visits, her voice small but steady. "Daddy, I'm okay. You don't need to worry so much." He would nod, hiding the storm in his chest. "It's my job to worry, but it's your job to keep that smile." She would smile then, wide enough to pull him through another day. Life demanded more from Daniel than it seemed he could ever give, yet he found a way. Each odd job was another thread in the net that kept them afloat. Each sacrifice was another brick in the foundation of love he was building for her future. The world might have labeled him only a janitor, but in Emily's eyes, he was builder, protector, and hero. So when she asked, on that particular morning, if she could come along to the mansion while he worked, Daniel hesitated. He hated the thought of her tiring herself just for a change of scenery. But she had insisted, her eyes alight with the prospect of sunshine and her voice firm. "I don't want to be home alone again, Dad. I want to be with you. Please." He could never resist that plea. With a gentle sigh and a smile that gave away his defeat, he had said yes. And so she came, crutches tapping steadily beside him, determination pulling her farther than her legs ever could. She wanted to feel the warmth of the day, the freedom of open air, the small joy of being near her father even when he worked. Daniel carried his tools, but in truth, his greatest labor that day, as on every day, was carrying hope for both of them. The marble steps of the mansion gleamed in the afternoon sun, their surface still damp from sprinklers that had swept across the lawn an hour earlier. To anyone else, the moisture was a minor detail, barely noticed. But for Emily, whose every step demanded precision, it became an invisible hazard. Daniel had set down his toolbox and was crouched near the base of the stair rail, tightening a loose bolt. His ears caught the faint rhythm of Emily's crutches tapping behind him, steady but uneven. He turned just as one crutch slipped against the wet stone. In a heartbeat, she wobbled, her body tilting dangerously forward. "Emily!" His voice cracked the air like a whip. He dropped the wrench, metal clattering against the stone, and lunged. His jacket came off in a swift motion, spread across the ground before her palms could scrape against the unforgiving steps. He caught her elbow with one hand, steadied her crutch with the other, and crouched until his eyes met hers. "You're okay," he murmured, voice low and steady. "I've got you. You're safe." Emily bit her lip, frustration flickering across her face. I almost fell, Dad. I'm sorry." Daniel shook his head firmly. "No apologies. Falling isn't failure. It's just part of walking." He brushed the dust from her sleeve, his touch gentle, almost reverent. "Now take a breath. We don't give up. Not today, not ever." Emily inhaled slowly, her chest rising as she steadied herself. Then she gave a small nod, her eyes, so much like her mother's, shining with determination. "Okay, I'll try again." Behind the tinted window of the car, the millionaire sat frozen, his breath shallow, his briefcase forgotten beside him. His world had been constructed on the idea that strength meant control, contracts signed, empires built, silence purchased. Yet here, on his own pristine steps, he witnessed a strength so different it left him unmoored. Daniel's hands, rough with years of labor, moved with a tenderness money could never teach. Emily, frail in frame, yet blazing with courage, smiled through her stumble as though defeat could never claim her. The millionaire felt a strange tightness in his chest. He tried to name it pity. No, it wasn't pity. Envy? Perhaps. It was something rarer, something buried so long he hardly recognized it. Longing. A longing for a bond that couldn't be bought, for a love that didn't need polished floors or gated estates to exist. He should have stepped out, demanded to know why his employee's daughter was on his property. That was the logical response, the one that matched the order of his life. But instead, he remained hidden, a silent witness to a moment too raw, too human to interrupt. Daniel steadied Emily's crutches, positioning them carefully before letting her weight rest on them again. "There you go," he said softly, pride flickering in his tired eyes. "See? You're stronger than any stumble." Emily smiled then, a smile braver than empires, brighter than the sun reflecting off the mansion's windows. And in that instant, the millionaire understood with startling clarity. He was watching wealth in its truest form. That night, long after the scene at the steps had ended, the millionaire sat in his study with a glass of scotch balanced between his fingers. Normally, this room soothed him. Mahogany shelves lined with books he rarely read, oil paintings of landscapes he had never visited, a desk that gleamed with the polish of weekly care. It was a space that whispered control and success, a reminder that he had built something permanent in a world where most men failed. But tonight, the silence pressed heavy against him. Every sip of his drink carried not the smooth burn he expected, but the echo of a different image. The janitor kneeling beside his daughter, whispering encouragement, jacket spread across wet stone. The millionaire closed his eyes, but the memory sharpened instead of fading. Daniel's hands, rough and cracked, steadying the fragile crutch. Emily's face, pale with effort yet brightened by determination. Their world was small, yet it pulsed with something vast and indestructible. In the following days, he carried that moment like a pebble in his shoe. During boardroom meetings, when partners discussed mergers and profits, he found his thoughts wandering. Numbers scrolled across digital screens, but all he saw was Emily biting her lip, refusing to surrender to weakness. At dinner parties where laughter bounced across marble floors, he tasted hollowness in the champagne. The sparkle of jewels, the polish of tailored suits. None of it matched the simple radiance of Daniel's devotion. It unsettled him. This comparison he had never invited. For years, he had believed wealth was a shield against emptiness, that comfort and control could replace what life had denied him: companionship, warmth, genuine connection. Yet the janitor, a man society barely noticed, carried more wealth in his daughter's smile than the millionaire carried in his entire estate. One evening, as he walked through his cavernous mansion, the millionaire paused in the great hall. The chandeliers threw shards of light across the marble, but the grandeur struck him as hollow. The house was large, but empty, perfect, but lifeless. His footsteps echoed too loudly, reminding him that no one waited for him at the end of the corridor. The briefcase he always carried, filled with contracts and figures, suddenly felt like ballast, something that weighed him down rather than lifted him up. He found himself gripping its handle not with pride, but with weariness. And still, in the quietest moments, he saw Emily's crutch slipping, Daniel's jacket sweeping across the ground, and the words whispered like a vow, "We don't give up." The thought gnawed at him. Perhaps, in all his pursuits, he had given up on something far more important than empire or influence. Several weeks passed, but the memory of that afternoon never loosened its grip on the millionaire. He found himself arriving home earlier than usual more often, though he rarely admitted to himself why. Perhaps he was testing the weight of his own house's silence. Perhaps he was waiting for the chance to see the janitor and his daughter again. One evening, the opportunity came. His driver pulled into the gates just as the sun dipped low, painting the estate in shades of amber and rose. The mansion looked beautiful as always, every line symmetrical, every corner flawless. Yet when he stepped through the front door, he didn't notice the architecture. His eyes caught instead on the small, unexpected tableau in the grand hallway. Daniel was there, bent over with mop and bucket, his movements steady and methodical. The man worked as though no one was watching, humming softly under his breath. And a few feet away, Perched carefully on a cushioned bench near the staircase sat Emily. Her crutches leaned against the wall within easy reach. She held a book in her hands, its cover worn, its spine creased. The second-hand paper looked out of place beneath the glittering chandelier, yet she turned the pages with the kind of rapt attention usually reserved for treasures. The millionaire paused mid-step, struck again by the quiet intimacy of their world. Emily's lips moved faintly as she read, her eyes alight with a joy that outshone the marble floors. For the first time in years, he felt hesitation about entering his own home, as though he might disturb something fragile, something purer than he deserved. At last, he cleared his throat gently. "That must be a good book." Emily startled, her head snapping up. She blinked, her cheeks coloring at being addressed by the mansion's owner. "Oh, yes, sir. It is." The millionaire softened his voice, lowering it in a way he rarely did with anyone. "May I ask what it's about?" She glanced at her father before answering, as though checking for permission. Daniel gave her a small nod, his mop paused mid-swipe. Emily looked back and said shyly, "It's about a girl who doesn't let the world tell her what she can't do. She finds her own way, even when it's hard." The millionaire's chest tightened. "And do you like stories like that?" "Yes," Emily replied without hesitation, her eyes suddenly brighter. "Someday, I want to write my own. Stories for people like me, who feel invisible sometimes. I want them to know they're not alone." Her words landed with the weight of truth, shaking something long dormant in him. The millionaire had heard countless pitches in boardrooms, bold visions of profits and markets. Yet none of them struck him like this. An unpolished dream spoken by a young woman who had every reason to despair, yet chose instead to lift others. For a long moment, he couldn't find his voice. He only nodded slowly, his gaze flicking to Daniel, who had returned to his work, silent and proud. And in that silence, the millionaire realized he was not witnessing coincidence. He was being offered a mirror, one that reflected not what he owned, but what he lacked. That night, after the encounter in the hallway, the millionaire lay awake longer than usual. Sleep eluded him, chased away by the echo of Emily's words. "I want to write stories for people like me." Her voice, soft, almost hesitant, still carried a conviction that struck deeper than any business proposal he had ever heard. She dreamed not of escape, not of wealth, but of giving hope. It unsettled him, because he had spent years chasing only what could be tallied, signed, or owned. In the days that followed, he found himself watching Daniel and Emily with new eyes. Daniel continued to arrive with his quiet endurance, polishing floors and fixing leaks without complaint. Emily often sat nearby, her book resting in her lap, her smile appearing whenever her father glanced her way. They carried with them a warmth that seemed to soften the coldest corners of the mansion. The millionaire began to wonder, what good was all his power if it could not be used for something more than another deal? At first, his efforts were small, almost cautious. He arranged for Emily to see a specialist doctor in the city, slipping the details discreetly to Daniel with the explanation, "It's covered. Don't worry about the cost." Daniel frowned, suspicion flickering in his tired eyes. But Emily's hopeful gaze silenced his protest before it could form. Next came the job offer. One evening, the millionaire stopped Daniel before he left. "You do good work," he said simply, his tone more measured than usual. "I could use someone like you in a permanent position here. A salary, benefits, something stable." Daniel stiffened. His instinct was to refuse. Pride surged in his chest, the kind that had kept him moving through years of hardship. But then he thought of Emily's medication bills, of the nights he had gone hungry so she could eat, of the way she looked at him as though he could solve anything. Still, his voice carried hesitation. "I don't want charity, sir." "This isn't charity," the millionaire replied firmly. "It's recognition. A man who works as hard as you deserves more than scraps. Consider it an investment, in you and in her." His eyes flicked toward Emily, who sat nearby, her crutches resting beside her. Something shifted in Daniel then, though the acceptance did not come easily. He nodded once, tight-lipped, as though agreeing to carry a weight that wasn't entirely his. Gradually, the millionaire's world opened to them in ways he had not planned. He found excuses to speak with Emily about her books, to listen when she described her stories, to catch the way Daniel's face softened every time she spoke. Each exchange chipped away at the armor he had worn for years, revealing a part of himself he had nearly forgotten existed. In the quiet after their visits, when he walked the long hallways alone, the millionaire admitted the truth he had resisted. His greatest fortune was not in what he possessed, but in the chance to give. For Daniel, accepting help never came easily. His life had trained him to survive on grit, not generosity. Every meal he'd put on the table, every roof he'd managed to keep over their heads, had been earned through sweat, exhaustion, and sacrifice. To lean on someone else felt dangerous, like giving away control of the only thing he had left, his dignity. So even after the millionaire arranged better medical care for Emily and offered him the stable job, Daniel wrestled with unease. He lay awake at night in their modest apartment, staring at the cracked ceiling, replaying the moments in his mind. Pride gnawed at him, whispering that no man should need another to provide for his family. One evening, as Emily prepared for bed, she noticed the crease in his brow that hadn't lifted all week. She leaned against her pillow, crutches propped nearby, and studied her father with the kind of perception only a daughter could have. "Dad," she said quietly, "you're thinking too loud again." Daniel chuckled faintly, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just a lot on my mind, sweetheart." She tilted her head, her gaze steady. "It's about Mr. Carter, isn't it?" Her name for the millionaire, spoken with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "You don't like him helping us." Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's not that I don't like him. It's just, I don't want us to feel like we owe anyone. I don't want pity. We've managed on our own this long. I can keep managing." Emily was silent for a moment. Then she reached out, her small hand covering his calloused one. "Dad, you've carried everything for so many years. Mom's gone, and it's just been you and me. You've never let me feel alone, not once. But maybe letting someone help isn't weakness. Maybe it's another kind of strength." Daniel looked at her, startled by the wisdom in her words. She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. "You always tell me I don't have to do everything by myself. That leaning on my crutches doesn't mean I'm weak. It just means I can go farther. Maybe it's the same for you. Maybe he's just a crutch for now, until we can stand taller." Her words pierced through his defenses, sinking into the part of him that had grown weary of fighting alone. He felt his throat tighten, his pride wrestling with the truth his daughter had spoken so gently. He squeezed her hand and whispered, "You're too wise for your age, Emily." She grinned softly. "I learned from the best." In that moment, Daniel understood. Accepting help didn't mean surrendering his dignity. It meant honoring the love he had for his daughter by giving her every chance possible. And if Emily, with all her courage, could embrace the idea of leaning on others, then perhaps he could, too. The weeks that followed were unlike any Daniel or Emily had known. For the first time in years, the constant pressure that had weighed on Daniel's shoulders began to lift. The new job meant he no longer had to piece together 3 different shifts just to pay the most urgent bills. His work was steady, his pay reliable, and though exhaustion still followed him home, it no longer dragged him to the ground. Emily's health began to improve under the care of specialists the millionaire had arranged. The treatments were not miracles. Her legs would always carry their limitations, but the constant pain softened, her steps steadied, and her energy blossomed. She began to walk a little longer each day, her crutches tapping with a rhythm that now sounded like progress rather than struggle. At night, instead of Daniel collapsing onto the couch with worry, he sat at the table with Emily as she wrote. Pages of her notebook filled quickly with words, characters, and beginnings of stories that she once only dreamed of creating. She would read them aloud in her bright, determined voice, and Daniel would sit back, pride swelling in his chest, knowing every sacrifice had been worth this moment. The millionaire, too, found himself changing. The vast rooms of his mansion no longer felt like monuments to solitude. They rang instead with a different presence, the soft sound of Emily's laughter when she shared a story idea, or Daniel's quiet humming as he worked with renewed dignity. For years, he had surrounded himself with silence and luxury, but neither had ever given him what these 2 people brought into his life without even trying: warmth, authenticity, and love. One afternoon, as he stood by the tall windows of his study, he caught sight of them outside. Daniel was teaching Emily how to plant flowers in a small patch of soil near the walkway. Emily knelt carefully, her crutches resting against the wall, her hands dirty as she patted soil around a fragile bloom. Daniel guided her gently, his voice calm, patient, proud. The millionaire watched, his throat tightening with a feeling that no business deal had ever inspired. For so long he had measured his worth in numbers, in properties, in the size of his empire. But looking at Daniel and Emily, he understood. True wealth had nothing to do with possession. It was about sacrifice, resilience, and the kind of love that could not be purchased. Later that evening, as the three of them shared tea in the kitchen, a room once too grand for comfort, now softened by laughter, the millionaire found himself speaking words he had never expected. "You know," he said slowly, almost awkwardly, "I used to think success meant filling a house like this. But lately, I've realized a house is just walls and floors. It doesn't mean much without people who make it feel alive." Daniel glanced at him, surprise flickering in his tired eyes. Emily smiled gently, as though she had already understood. In that quiet, the millionaire finally accepted what he had been chasing all along. His greatest riches were not the cars in his garage, the stocks in his portfolio, or the chandeliers in his hallways. They were right there with him. A janitor who never stopped fighting for his daughter, and a young woman whose courage outshone every limitation. And in their presence, he rediscovered the truth he had nearly lost. Kindness matters, love matters, and those are the only treasures that endure.